We're still talking about shame. When I was in grade school, there was one girl who was always picked on. I too was often picked on, but not like her. For her, it was relentless. And there was one occasion when I caved and I participated in a not so subtle act of unkindness, not wanting to be the only outlier in my classroom. I participated. It was bad enough that the teacher had to speak to all of us as a class. I knew inside it was wrong. I didn't need her to tell me that. I knew in the moment I sacrificed her well-being for my own, to be a part of something. In that moment of acquiescing, I had compromised my values, my own personal values of not causing harm. I didn't see it that way for a very long time either. Even in therapy, I never really got to the root of the matter, to resolving the queasy feeling I felt inside my belly. I couldn't reconcile the discrepancy between who I thought I was and what I had actually done. I knew it was wrong. And over the years, many times I had asked for forgiveness in my own personal prayers. But it wasn't until I really named shame, that I was ashamed of my own behavior. That was the first handhold of peace that comes when you stop resisting and defending what you did wrong. That was my first handhold for peace. Naming it and learning how to stomach the unpleasant feelings that came along with not being in alignment with my values. And that was a very important learning for me. That was my first real lesson in shame. And honestly, it took me until my 50s to be able to truly name what that experience was and the residue of discomfort that it had left behind. It's kind of like that, these uncomfortable feelings. We don't really want to look at them. And it's hard. If we don't look, we can't really name them. But naming it from a place of compassion, from a place of mindfulness, is what the difference was. That without that view of friendliness, I was stuck in a shame hole. So shame, what is it exactly? What does it look like? What does it feel like for you? And how does shame differ from simply being embarrassed or humiliated? I mean that. They're different. Just words, right? Concepts, right? Yeah, right. Except for sure they don't feel that way. For sure they don't feel good, do they? I think that's part of the problem. Right? We don't want to look at them unless we have to. We don't want to look at the unpleasant. We don't deliberately do that most of the time. So let's be brave together today and let's look at these powerful words because they carry weight, they carry meaning, they carry gravitas. Each one has its own particular flavor, you could say. And to make it more complicated, each of these for each of us is experienced differently, felt differently, understood and explained differently at different times. Oh my, very complicated. So I was talking to a fellow therapist the other day who had recently attended a workshop on shame. And much to their surprise, they were stumped when they were invited to consider what shame feels like. Stumped again, because even though they found it difficult to recall specifics in their life when they felt that feeling. I think that's a very good starting point, actually. Do you know for yourself what shame is, what it feels like? Because for each of us, it feels different. So it's really good to consider that and clarify what it is. As uncomfortable as it may be, we have to know when shame is on the scene in order to attend to it properly, that is, kindly and caringly. So often we don't feel these kinds of emotions. They're just a blur or they're too overwhelming, right? We don't want to remember. I certainly didn't. That's right. That's human to not want to remember. Shame is incongruent, incompatible with self-esteem. It erodes our sense of self. Who wants to feel that? It overwhelms, it offends, it hurts others, and it hurts us. But how else are we going to get to know it if we don't turn and look? If we don't stop and clarify what is being seen and how it feels? Why not do it together? Okay, so let's take a step back and let's operationalize shame from a mindfulness perspective, right? I'm going to be very specific, a mindfulness perspective. That means no judgment here, only goodwill. This is very important if we're going to be looking at difficult emotions. Best to get us into a useful frame of mind, one that supports looking and feeling unpleasant emotions. Out of the ground of friendliness, we look at shame. Shame arises when we act or speak in ways that are incongruent with the ethic of goodwill and non-harm. It's that simple. That's straightforward, but harder to see in actuality, in real time. Harder to see because life is moving at a clip. And we don't land anywhere for very long. The busyness of life is really a good distraction, right? And who wants to look at this? It's an embarrassment to us. It offends us. It offends our sense of self to do something unskillful. We don't want to own it, but there it is. There it is. And it is unpleasant to recollect those things that on reflection are not up to our standards, that are beneath us. And yet there it is. It's done. We did it. This is what mindfulness defines as shame, going against a code of ethic that is based on goodwill and non-harm. And being out of alignment with goodwill and non-harm doesn't feel good, period, right? Now, this is different than transgressing from our own personal code of ethic, which may or may not be explicitly named and operationalized for ourselves. For example, being raised Catholic, I was taught that having premarital sex made me a sinner. No, this is not to debate anything whatsoever. But as a young woman growing up in the 70s here in North America, this value did not seem in accord with the times or with my contemporaries. Sex was not a sin. It just seemed normal for the time and place. That discrepancy in ethics alone caused me years of suffering. My personal values were not in accord with those of the church. Good to know. This is also not the way of mindfulness. The way of mindfulness is inhabiting a view of friendliness. Remember, this is the ground. Friendliness affords a kind of grace when we are looking and feeling. And we aim to understand from a non-judgmental, caring place. And so we look and feel from here and practice finding our balance as we look, as we feel, so as not to go to overwhelm. And right there lies the kindness in the way we approach, in the way we relate to that experience. Can you feel the difference that kindness makes? All right. So back to my story at the beginning. It took me until I was in my 50s to really begin to understand the importance of looking at these difficult emotions through the lens of mindfulness. It's what allowed me to stomach looking at shame and feeling the yuck of it. A helpful marker, I might add, that feeling of yuck, a very helpful marker. And I still honestly feel a disconcerting pang when I think about that situation in third grade. I should. That tells me my heart is being conditioned. I did something unskillful. But as I stand with Susan in third grade, I'll make a correction right there. Mindfully standing with Susan in third grade allows the lesson to take hold, allows her to learn from the mistake. This is how our hearts grow more compassionate, by seeing the harm that we cause and making corrections. No judgment to Susan as a person, but absolutely judgment as to cause and effect. The discernment of cause and effect that sees and understands the action was unskillful and that harm was caused, period. But seeing through the lens of mindfulness, I can own this. And I can see where I get caught. And I can begin to unbind from Susan's need in the moment and the overall values that guide her behavior. Desire to belong is strong, good to know, and good to understand that the desire needs to be weighed against my own personal values, against the values I ascribe to as a mindfulness practitioner. Right? As much as is possible, as much as can be remembered, may my speech and actions be informed by the values of non-harm and goodwill. This is the intention of mindfulness. And we can do this. We can recollect that intention. May my speech and actions be informed by values of non-harm and goodwill. This is how we steer away from shame and steer out of it. We can incline our minds and hearts this way. It's for our welfare. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention.